So hi, I'm good, and I'm here to show you how Chill Freeze and Shock work. So Chill Freeze and Shock are both elemental status ailments. They can only be caused by critical hits on enemies. I'm not capable of doing crits with this character. I have a Resolute technique, and you can get around the fact that you need crits by having something called Chance to Shock or Chance to Freeze. So this Cold Snap has 40% chance to freeze, and that's how I can kind of get around. So I can show you guys Shock and Chill and stuff. So what are they? Chill is just simply a status ailment that makes you go slower. And you can kind of see it over these mobs over here. So they're frozen right now, but you know those guys, they're just chilled and they move really slowly for right now. It's kind of like having free temp chains on enemies. And if you can see my toolbar, I have a couple of skills equipped. I have 2 Cold Snaps and 2 Lightning Novas, or Shock Novas. And they're pretty much exactly the same, except the damages on them are different. So I have a really weak Shock Nova, and a pretty strong Shock Nova, which does pretty good damage. And then I have a really weak Cold Snap, and then a really strong Cold Snap, which I can't spam because it has a cooldown. Bam. And that's the one that can actually freeze the guys. And the reason why one of these Cold Snaps can freeze, and why only one of these Shock Novas can really shock enemies for any significant duration, is because the freeze, chill, and shock durations are based off the total percent of the mob's life pool you do in damage with a single hit of the element that causes that status ailment. So I could have, like, I have added lightning damage on this Cold Snap, and it makes the Cold Snap do more damage, but it doesn't matter for the freeze duration, because the freeze duration is only based off of cold damage. So I have to do more cold damage in a single hit to cause a freeze of any significant duration. So yeah, I hit these white mobs over here, and you can kind of see how much, yeah, it takes off me 10-15% of the life pool, and it can freeze the whole pack. Same with like the stronger Shock Nova. And I'm gonna go over some stuff in town, I guess. So I have these gems linked up to Elemental Proliferation, which causes the elemental status ailments of the supported skills to spread to other enemies. It also gives some increased durations, and that's kind of important as well. So the reason why one of these Cold Snaps can freeze is because the percent of life pool you need to do, or you basically have to do a large amount of damage relative to the enemy's life pool in order to cause the status ailment. That's because the status ailment itself has a minimum duration. You can't freeze or shock or chill an enemy for less than 0.3 seconds. And there are some specific numbers over the base durations of these status ailments. So freeze, I think, is 100 milliseconds per percent of life pool in damage you do in a single hit of cold damage. But shock has a much larger threshold, so shock is, I think, 0.3 seconds for every percent of life. I don't know, I'll put a link in the description for the exact mechanics on all of them. But pretty much you have to do damage in order to shock. You have to do a lot of the enemy's life pool and damage. So like it just hit that skeleton for a lot of damage, and I assume that's the one that's shocked, so he's gonna be proliferating shock for quite a while. And it's still proliferating. Yeah, now it's finally done. So I'm using the Elemental Proliferation gem on this, so it's actually really strong for these two mechanics because it allows you to shock and freeze guys you would not normally be able to. So say this rare has a lot more hit points than these white mobs, but since these white mobs are around, I can freeze them instead of the rare, and because they're frozen, Elemental Proliferation makes the anyone who's in the range of the proliferating guy, so if a guy's frozen with proliferation, his freeze spreads to all the other enemies. So on the basis that I can do enough damage to any of these mobs, so if any of these mobs have a small enough life pool for me to use, I can freeze them, which allows me to freeze the rare, although I could never actually do enough damage to freeze the rare itself. because the rare just has, you know, like many more hit points. So, you know, I can freeze him even though he took no damage. It's the same way with shock. Like, I can't do enough damage to shock the rare like I might be able to, but it's far easier to shock a white mob next to the rare, and then the white mob can shock the rare for me with elemental proliferation. So I can, you know, shock that guy up by using all these crappier skeletons instead of the stronger skeletons. So if you're fighting a boss, for instance, and you're trying to shock the boss of, say, a map, you can drag over crappy white mobs to the boss and then shock those with elemental proliferation, and then you can shock the boss that way to double the damage you can do to the boss. That's a really good way of boosting the damage you can do against even really tough enemies that you should normally be able to shock or freeze. And yeah, so that's how that kind of works, especially with the elemental proliferation gem. It's also why it's kind of like the funnest gem to use, I think, in the game. It has so many interesting uses on it. So anyways, I'm Gouda, and I'll see you next time. Or actually, wait a second. You can lower the threshold of shock, chill, and freeze by getting increased duration on those. So like these Thunder Fists have 100% increased shock duration. The Static Blows Keystone has some shock duration near it, so the Static Blows Keystone has 20% increased shock duration. Near Breath of Rhyme, there's 30% increased freeze duration, and if you take those, it increases, or it lowers the threshold for causing a shock. So, as I said, the shock, chill, and freeze can only have a minimum duration of 0.3 seconds. That did a shock, or you did a damage, or you did a hit with lightning damage that would have caused a 0.2 second duration shock. If I did not equip the Thunder Fists with their 100% increased shock duration, the enemy would never ever be shocked, even for, you know, a very tiny duration. But if I had the Thunder Fists on, they would be shocked. And 0.4 seconds doesn't seem like a lot. It seems like a really short amount of time. But say if you're using lightning arrow with chain, and you shoot into a mob, so you shoot into a mob, and then the arrow chains, so the enemy gets shocked, and the arrow chains, it'll bounce back to the enemy in a really short amount of time. So even though some durations on the shocks might be really low, it can still boost damage up quite significantly if you utilize it with some interesting things. So anyways, I am Gouda, and I will see you next time.